I am Maya Sterling, 34 years old and a forensic accountant who specializes in investigating financial fraud. At my grandfather Jeremiah's will reading, the lawyer handed me my entire inheritance, a rundown house in the West End of Atlanta, and a single faded $20 bill. The room immediately exploded with cruel laughter. My younger sister Nia and her arrogant hedge fund manager husband Preston mocked me relentlessly. My father Marcus, a famously wealthy real estate mogul, looked me dead in the eye and sneered. He told me I had wasted 5 years of my life caring for a broke and useless old man, and now I had a pile of absolute junk to show for it. I did not cry or argue. I just smiled, took that worn-out $20 bill, and walked out the door. What my toxic family did not know was that my eyes are professionally trained to spot anomalies. The serial number printed on that bill was not just a random string of digits. It was a precise vault code, a code that unlocked the dark, twisted truth about how my father actually built his $500 million empire, and it was the exact weapon I would use to bring him to his knees and take back everything he stole. Before I continue this story and tell you how I destroyed my family's fake empire, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe if you believe that karma always collects its debts. Growing up in the affluent neighborhoods of Atlanta, the Sterling name represented the ultimate picture of success and Black excellence to the outside world. But behind the heavy oak doors of our gated mansion in Buckhead, emotional cruelty and greed permeated every single interaction. My father ruled our family with an iron fist, completely obsessed with public image, ruthless power, and accumulating wealth at any cost. My mother, Vivian, a former sorority queen, cared infinitely more about maintaining her social status and showing off her designer wardrobe than nurturing her own children. Then there was my sister Nia. She was the undeniable golden child who could simply do no wrong, always showered with lavish gifts and endless praise, while my own academic and professional achievements were entirely ignored. They worshipped money above all else. Because of that greed, they despised my grandfather Jeremiah when his business collapsed. They cut him off completely, leaving him to age in isolation, while they flaunted their luxury cars and exclusive country club memberships. For 5 long years, I was the only person who showed up to care for him. They called me a fool. They called me a total failure who lacked the family ambition. They thought they had finally won and proven their superiority when the lawyer handed me that pathetic $20 bill. But they forgot one crucial detail about who I am. I track dirty money for a living, and I was about to perform a ruthless audit on my own blood. The heavy mahogany doors of the law firm closed with a dull thud, sealing us inside the conference room. The tension in the air was thick enough to choke on. My father, Marcus Sterling, sat at the head of the massive table like a king holding court. He wore a custom-tailored suit that screamed new money and old arrogance. Beside him sat my mother, Vivian. She spent the entire morning adjusting her diamond tennis necklace, acting as if she were waiting for a luxury spa treatment rather than mourning the man who gave her husband his start in life. Across from me sat my younger sister, Naya. She was busy checking her reflection in the dark screen of her phone, thoroughly bored by the proceedings. Next to her was her husband, Preston. He was a white hedge fund manager who loved nothing more than to insert himself into our family business and explain high finance to me, completely ignoring the fact that I held a master's degree in forensic accounting. Mr. Harrison, the senior attorney handling the estate, cleared his throat and opened the thick leather folder resting in front of him. He pushed his glasses up his nose and began to read the legal jargon that would officially divide my grandfather Jeremiah's remaining worldly possessions. To my youngest granddaughter, Nia Sterling Davis. Mr. Harrison read, his voice completely devoid of emotion. I leave the sum of $2.5 million held in a generation-skipping trust alongside the deed to the vacation property in Hilton Head. Nia squealed loudly, clapping her hands together. Preston leaned back in his plush leather chair, crossing his arms with a highly smug expression. He looked at my father and nodded silently, acknowledging the wealth that had just been injected into his own household. Marcus beamed with pride. He looked at Nia as if she had earned that money through sheer hard work, rather than simply being born as his favorite child. I sat perfectly still, keeping my hands folded quietly in my lap. For 5 long years, while Nia was busy shopping in Paris, and Preston was playing the stock market, I was the only person who visited Grandpa Jeremiah. I was the one who managed his doctors, cooked his meals, and sat by his bed listening to his stories about the old days, building homes in Atlanta. My family had written him off as a complete failure the moment his original construction business went under. They treated him like a contagious disease, an embarrassment to the pristine, sterling legacy they loved to brag about at their exclusive country club dinners. To them, anyone who lost money was a moral failure. Mr. Harrison turned the page. The room grew uncomfortably quiet as he looked directly at me. To my eldest granddaughter, Maya Sterling, he read, pausing for a fraction of a second. I leave the residential property located on Oak Street in the West End district. Furthermore, I leave her this single currency note to be delivered exactly as I have instructed. Mr. Harrison reached into his briefcase and pulled out a worn plastic sleeve. He slid it across the wide mahogany table until it stopped right in front of me. Inside the sleeve was a $20 bill. It was faded, creased at the corners, and printed in the year 1996. For a moment, the room was dead silent. Then Preston burst into loud, obnoxious laughter. The sound bounced off the wood-paneled walls, harsh and grating. He slapped his hand against the table, his face turning red with amusement. "Well," Maya Preston chuckled, looking at me with pure condescension. "I guess that pays for a cup of premium coffee to drink in your new rat-infested shack. You better hold on to that 20 tightly. I hear the property taxes in the West End are going up now that real developers like your father are moving in." Nia giggled loudly, leaning her head onto Preston's shoulder. "I told you she was wasting her time playing nurse," she mocked. "All those weekends driving across town to feed him soup and she gets a piece of trash paper. You could have been working at a real corporate firm, Maya. Instead, you get a literal shack in a neighborhood that is falling apart." I did not react. I simply looked down at the bill. Through the clear plastic, the green numbers stared back at me. My father, Marcus, slammed his fist on the table. The sudden violence in his movement made the crystal water glasses rattle. His eyes were full of absolute disgust as he glared at me. "You threw away a brilliant career in financial auditing to wipe the chin of a useless, broke old man." He sneered, his voice dripping with venom. "I told you Jeremiah had nothing left. I told you he was a weak loser who did not know how to survive in the real business world. But you had to play the martyr. You had to act like you were better than us." Marcus stood up, leaning his heavy frame over the table toward me. "This family is built on power and wealth. We are the definition of success in this city, and you bring us a piece of garbage. You humiliate me, Maya. You are an absolute disgrace to the Sterling name. To walk out of a will reading with a $20 bill is a joke. You are a joke." Vivian finally stopped playing with her diamonds. She reached into her designer handbag and pulled out a crisp, folded legal document. She tossed it across the table. It landed right on top of the plastic sleeve holding my $20 bill. I looked down at the document. It was a property transfer agreement. "Your father's company is currently acquiring lots in the West End for a new commercial development," Vivian said, her voice ice cold and commanding. "That rundown house you just inherited is sitting right in the middle of his planned parking structure. You have absolutely no money to renovate it, and you cannot afford the upkeep. You are practically bankrupt from playing caretaker." She pulled a silver pen from her purse and pushed it toward me. "Sign the paper," Maya Vivian demanded, her eyes narrowing into a vicious glare. "Sign the papers to transfer that junk house to your father's company right now, you piece of trash." I picked up the heavy silver pen my mother had slid across the table. The silence in the room was absolute, pressing against my ears as the collective gaze of my family bored into my skin. They fully expected me to break. They expected me to submit, to sign away the only thing my grandfather had left me, just to appease their relentless greed. I held the cold metal of the pen for a moment, feeling the weight of their judgment. Then I stood up slowly. I did not raise my voice. I did not shed a single tear. I looked down at the property transfer document, placed the pen precisely in the center of the page, and gently pushed it back across the smooth mahogany surface. "I am not signing anything," I said quietly. My voice was steady, slicing through the heavy air like a perfectly sharpened blade. My mother gasped, clutching her chest, as if I had physically struck her. Marcus's face flushed a deep, dangerous shade of red. "Don't be stupid," my father barked, slamming his hand on the table again. "That property is a massive liability. It requires back taxes and structural renovations you cannot afford. You have zero capital and 0 cents." Preston let out a patronizing sigh and leaned forward, adopting the tone of a teacher scolding a slow child. "Listen to your father, Maya," he said, adjusting his expensive silk tie. "You simply do not understand how commercial real estate leverage works in the real world. You are completely out of your depth here. Take whatever pennies Marcus is offering you for that shack before the city condemns it." I turned my attention entirely away from my parents and focused directly on my brother-in-law. Leverage. I repeated the word slowly, letting it roll off my tongue. "That is a very interesting word for you to use today, Preston. Tell me exactly how is the leverage over at Vanguard Capital Management working out for you this quarter?" Preston's smug smirk instantly faltered. The easy confidence drained from his posture and he sat up completely straight. "Because, as a forensic accountant, I make it my absolute business to read the obscure public filings that most people ignore." I continued, taking a step away from the table. "I noticed your flagship fund is down 32% over the last 4 months. You have been issuing margin calls like a desperate man. In fact, your liquidity is so terrible right now that you could not even secure a traditional bank mortgage for that new $3 million mansion in Buckhead." Nia scoffed loudly, crossing her arms defensively over her designer dress. "You are just bitter and jealous," she snapped, glaring at me with pure hatred. "Preston bought our new house entirely in cash. He had a record-breaking year on Wall Street." I looked at my sister with nothing but cold pity. "Nia, your husband did not buy that house," I said, keeping my tone deadly calm. "Dad did." Marcus stood up abruptly, pointing a trembling finger at me. "Keep your mouth shut right now, Maya." I ignored his command. "I saw the shadow corporate filings buried in the county clerk system," I said, my voice rising just enough to dominate the room. "Dad's holding company originated the loan. Preston used his failing hedge fund as collateral for a massive high-interest private loan from Sterling Real Estate. If Preston's fund collapses, which my mathematical models show it is on track to do by late November, Dad officially owns your house. Your perfect wealthy husband is completely broke, Nia. You are living on Daddy's secret credit line, heavily disguised to look like white corporate success." Nia let out a sharp gasp and turned wildly to Preston. His face had gone the color of chalk. He opened his mouth to speak, but absolutely nothing came out. Vivian stood up her chair, screeching violently against the hardwood floor. "How dare you speak to your sister and her husband this way?" she yelled, her flawless country club facade cracking completely. "You are just a bitter, jealous woman, making up horrible lies because you got nothing from this family but a pile of dirt and a worthless $20 bill. You are trying to destroy Nia's happiness out of pure spite." "I do not make up numbers, Mother," I replied without blinking. "Numbers are the only thing in this family that actually tell the truth." "I will ruin you," Marcus warned. His voice was a low, dangerous growl vibrating with genuine malice. "I will blacklist your name at every accounting firm in Atlanta. You will never audit another spreadsheet in this city. You will be unemployed and starving. Give me the deed to the West End property right now, and I will let you walk out of here." I reached across the table and picked up the plastic sleeve containing the faded $20 bill. I slipped it carefully into my handbag and snapped the gold clasp shut. The sharp click echoed loudly in the tense silence of the conference room. "My property stays with me," I said, looking my father directly in the eye. Then I turned my gaze back to Preston, who was gripping the edge of the table. "Enjoy your new mansion, Preston. I truly hope you did not illegally use client funds to cover the margin calls on those offshore tech stocks last Tuesday. The Securities and Exchange Commission has absolutely zero sense of humor about wire fraud." Preston swallowed hard, a visible bead of cold sweat forming at his temple. He knew that I knew his darkest secret. I turned my back on the people who shared my blood and walked confidently toward the heavy mahogany doors, leaving them to choke on the very lies they had built their perfect empire upon. The heavy mahogany doors clicked shut behind me. The humid Atlanta heat hit my face the moment I stepped onto the pavement. I did not look back at the law firm. I walked directly to my car and slid into the driver's seat. My fuel gauge was low, so I pulled into an upscale gas station just off Peachtree Street. I swiped my primary platinum card at the pump. A sharp beep echoed from the machine, followed by a bright red declined message. I frowned and pulled out my secondary corporate card. I swiped it again. Declined. I opened the banking application on my phone. Every single account tied to the Sterling family name, including the trust funds I had meticulously managed for my own consulting business, displayed a frozen status with a zero available balance. A text message illuminated my screen. It was from Marcus. It read, "You bite the hand that feeds you, you starve. Your credit lines are dead. Your accounts are locked. Give me the deed by morning, or I will make sure you cannot even buy a single loaf of bread in this city." He actually thought cutting off my access to his wealth would break my spirit. He assumed I was exactly like Nia, completely dependent on the Sterling bankroll to survive. He did not realize I had spent the last decade building a shadow network of offshore accounts and private investments using my independent auditing fees. I did not need his money to live. I paid for my gas using cash from my wallet and merged onto the highway. I drove straight out of the glittering high-rises of Buckhead and headed deep into the West End. This historic district was once the beating heart of Black culture and entrepreneurship in Atlanta. Now it was a brutal battleground for aggressive gentrification. It was constantly targeted by ruthless real estate predators, exactly like my father. I pulled up to Oak Street. The property my grandfather left me stood in stark contrast to the rapidly modernizing neighborhood around it. It was a dilapidated Victorian house. The paint was peeling in long gray strips. The front porch sagged heavily to one side, and the yard was a wild jungle of overgrown weeds. It looked exactly like the pile of absolute garbage my father claimed it was. I unlocked the heavy front door with the rusted brass key the lawyer had provided. The hinges screamed in loud protest. The air inside smelled of damp wood, thick dust, and forgotten memories. There was no electricity. The house had been abandoned for years. The only illumination came from the amber glow of a street lamp filtering through the cracked grime-covered window panes. I walked into the center of the empty living room. Every footstep echoed against the bare floorboards. I set my laptop down on an overturned wooden crate. I opened the screen, and the harsh bluish light bathed the decaying walls around me. I reached into my handbag and retrieved the plastic sleeve. I slid the $20 bill out and laid it flat next to my keyboard. I stared at the bill. Something about it felt completely wrong. Grandpa Jeremiah was a brilliant, meticulous man. He was a master of details who built entire neighborhoods from scratch. He never did anything by accident. He certainly would not leave his oldest granddaughter a random piece of paper as a final insult. I leaned closer, examining the green ink under the glow of my laptop screen. I turned the bill over, running my fingertips across the textured paper. Then my eyes locked onto the serial number printed in the corner. I pulled a small magnifying glass from my briefcase. It was a tool I regularly used to verify physical signatures on fraudulent financial documents. The serial sequence did not match standard Department of Treasury formatting. The font was slightly altered, and the alphanumeric sequence was entirely unnatural. It read FFB-1996-042-V. My forensic training kicked into high gear. My brain automatically began decoding the pattern. FFB stood for First Federal Bank. It was the exact financial institution where my grandfather had worked as a senior vault security director before Marcus destroyed his construction business. 1996 was the exact year his company was forced to file for bankruptcy. I typed the sequence rapidly into my secure encrypted database. My fingers flew across the keyboard as I ran a cross-reference on banking index codes from the late 90s. The database returned a positive match in less than 10 seconds. The code was not currency. It was a highly classified routing and identification matrix for a maximum security blind trust vault. 042 was the vault block number. The letter V stood for Verified Biometric Access. My grandfather had not left me $20. He had left me a physical key to a hidden safety deposit box. He knew my father would aggressively monitor every legal document, every will provision, and every bank account tied to his name. Marcus had eyes everywhere in the Atlanta financial sector. The only way to pass something of massive value to me without Marcus intercepting it was to hide it in plain sight. He gave me a complex puzzle he knew only a forensic accountant could solve. He gave me the one thing my father would never look twice at because my father only respected incredibly large numbers. Marcus despised small money. The sheer brilliance of my grandfather's strategy sent a massive rush of adrenaline through my veins. He had hidden something monumental inside that bank vault, something powerful enough to require this level of extreme secrecy. I reached out to grab the bill and pack up my laptop. I needed to get to First Federal Bank the moment their doors opened in the morning. But before my fingers could touch the paper, the solid oak floorboards beneath my boots began to vibrate violently. The cracked window panes rattled harshly in their wooden frames. A deafening mechanical roar tore through the quiet night air, shaking the entire foundation of the house. I snapped my head toward the front window. The blinding, aggressive yellow headlights of a heavy industrial vehicle pierced through the darkness of the living room. I heard the loud, unmistakable crunch of metal treads tearing up the overgrown front yard. A massive bulldozer had just driven straight onto my property, and its heavy steel blade was aimed directly at the front porch. The bulldozer engine roared, spitting thick black diesel smoke into the pale dawn sky. The sun was just barely beginning to crack over the Atlanta skyline, casting long, distorted shadows across the overgrown yard. The massive steel blade stopped less than 3 feet from the rotting wooden steps of the porch. The ground beneath my boots finally stopped shaking. The heavy door of the cabin swung open. Preston stepped out of the heavy machinery looking utterly ridiculous and dangerously arrogant. From where I stood on the porch, the angle made him look like a conqueror stepping onto foreign soil, but his pristine attire ruined the illusion completely. He was wearing a custom-fit Italian suit jacket over a crisp white button-down shirt paired with expensive designer jeans and spotless suede boots. The early morning mist clung to the fine fabric of his clothes. He jumped down his boots, landing heavily in the Georgia red clay. He looked up at me, his jaw set in a hard, superior line. He signaled to the burly construction crew behind him, 4 men in hard hats who looked entirely uncomfortable being deployed for an illegal demolition before sunrise. "Good morning, Maya," Preston called out, his voice dripping with condescension. The sound cut sharply through the humid morning air. "Marcus told me you might be stubborn. He sent me to handle the garbage disposal personally. It is time for you to pack up your little laptop and vacate the premises. This entire block is scheduled for immediate clearance." I calmly closed my laptop, ensuring the $20 bill was safely secured inside my leather briefcase. I slung the strap over my shoulder, stepped out through the broken front door, and stood on the edge of the sagging porch. "You do not have a demolition permit, Preston. The city zoning office does not open for another 3 hours, and the deed to this property is legally registered in my name. You are trespassing." Preston laughed, a sharp, dismissive sound that echoed off the empty houses down the street. He walked closer, stopping right at the edge of the rusted chain-link fence. He looked at me with the absolute certainty of a wealthy white man who had never faced a single consequence in his entire life. He loved to flaunt his status, treating the historic black neighborhood of the West End like it was nothing more than a monopoly board waiting to be conquered by him and my father. "Permits are for poor people, Maya. Marcus owns the zoning board. He owns the local precinct. Do you really think anyone is going to care if a condemned house in the West End gets knocked down a few hours early by a registered developer? You have absolutely no power here. You are just a bitter woman making a scene to get your daddy's attention." He reached into the inner pocket of his suit jacket and pulled out a leather checkbook. He uncapped a gold fountain pen and quickly scribbled across the paper. He tore the check from the binding and tossed it casually onto the wet, muddy ground at the bottom of the porch steps. "There is $50,000, he said, pointing at the dirt. "Pick it up. That is more money than you will make in 2 years auditing spreadsheets. Take the cash, go back to your rented apartment, and let the real adults handle the real estate business. Marcus is being generous. Do not push your luck, Maya. You do not want to see what happens when the Sterling family actually gets angry." I looked down at the slip of paper resting in the mud. I did not bend down. I did not break eye contact. Instead, I walked down the wooden steps, my boots crunching against the gravel. I stepped right over his pathetic check and walked directly in front of the massive rusted steel blade of the bulldozer. I stood my ground, crossing my arms over my chest. I was less than an arm's length away from the heavy machinery. The driver in the cabin looked panicked and immediately took his hands off the controls. Preston frowned, his smug expression twisting into deep irritation. "Move out of the way, Maya. I am not playing games with you." "Neither am I," I replied, keeping my voice perfectly level. "Let us talk about your offshore accounts, Preston, specifically the shell company registered in the Cayman Islands under the name Apex Holdings. You established it exactly 3 days before my father publicly announced the acquisition of the downtown commercial district." Preston froze. The color drained from his face so fast he looked practically translucent in the morning light. The arrogant posture collapsed instantly. "As a hedge fund manager, you are bound by strict fiduciary duties." I continued, taking a slow step toward him. "But you used your father-in-law's advanced knowledge of commercial zoning changes to aggressively short-sell the stock of local retail businesses in that exact district. You knew they would be forced into bankruptcy by the new development plans. You traded on insider information, hid the illegal profits in Apex Holdings, and then used that dirty money to cover the massive margin calls your legitimate fund was bleeding." "You are out of your mind," Preston stammered, though his voice lacked any real conviction. He glanced nervously at the construction workers, terrified they were listening. "You have no proof of anything. You are just making up financial buzzwords to sound smart." "I am a forensic accountant, Preston. I do not make things up. I trace the money. I found the wire transfers routed through the dummy corporation in Delaware. I found the IP addresses matching your private home network in Buckhead. I found the exact timestamps of your trades perfectly correlating with my father's closed-door board meetings." I took another step closer to him, lowering my voice so only he could hear the absolute venom in my words. "I spent the entire night sitting in this dark, rotting house running the algorithms. I cracked your hidden ledgers. I have compiled a comprehensive 90-page dossier detailing every single federal crime you have committed over the last 4 years. It is fully encrypted and sitting in my outbox right now. The recipient is the Enforcement Division of the Securities and Exchange Commission." Preston swallowed hard. I could see the pulse beating wildly in his neck. His hands, which had been resting confidently on his hips just moments ago, were now trembling slightly at his sides. He looked back at his construction crew. They were watching him, waiting for an order. "If this bulldozer moves 1 single inch forward," I said, my voice echoing clearly in the quiet dawn air, "if a single blade of grass on my property is disturbed, I will hit send. The SEC will freeze every asset you manage by noon. The FBI will be at your $3 million mansion before dinner. You will be stripped of your licenses. Your assets will be seized, and you will spend the next 10 to 15 years in a federal penitentiary explaining to the other inmates how you lost everything because you tried to illegally bulldoze my house." The silence that followed was deafening. The only sound was the low rumbling idle of the bulldozer engine. Preston stared at me, his eyes wide with genuine terror. He finally realized that the woman he had just mocked, the woman he assumed was weak and powerless, held his entire life in the palm of her hand. He was completely outmatched by the very person his family had deemed a failure. He slowly raised his hand and signaled to the driver. "Cut the engine," he ordered, his voice cracking slightly. The massive machine sputtered and died, plunging the yard into heavy silence. The construction workers looked highly confused, but visibly relieved to be backing down. Preston took a step back, his designer boots slipping slightly in the mud. He did not bother picking up the $50,000 check. It lay ruined in the dirt, entirely worthless. He looked at me with a mixture of intense hatred and absolute fear. "You think you have won, Preston?" hissed his face, twisting into an ugly scowl. "You think you are so smart. But you are just delaying the inevitable. Marcus will not let this go. He will use every connection, every politician, and every dollar he has to crush you. You have absolutely no idea the kind of hell he is about to unleash on you." He turned on his heel and marched back toward his luxury SUV, slamming the door shut. I stood perfectly still in the morning mist, watching his taillights disappear down the street, knowing that the war had just officially begun. I did not waste a single second celebrating Preston's retreat. The moment his SUV turned the corner and disappeared from sight, I grabbed my briefcase, locked the heavy front door of the rotting house, and headed straight for my car. The morning sun was fully up now, casting a bright, unforgiving light over the city of Atlanta. I drove toward the financial district, my mind hyper-focused on the sequence of numbers printed on that faded $20 bill. FFB-1996-042-V. First Federal Bank. The imposing marble facade of First Federal Bank loomed ahead. I walked through the heavy revolving doors, the click of my boots echoing sharply across the polished granite floors. The air inside was heavily air-conditioned, sterile, and deliberately intimidating. I bypassed the standard teller lines and walked directly to the high-net-worth client services desk. A polished bank manager in a sharp navy suit looked up, his professional smile firmly in place. I did not give him my name. I simply slid the $20 bill across the pristine glass counter and stated that I was here to claim a legacy-secure deposit box under a verified biometric mandate. The manager looked at the bill, then back at me with a hint of confusion. He picked up the note, inspected the unusual serial number, and his professional demeanor instantly shifted into high alert. He typed the sequence into his terminal. The screen flashed, and he immediately stood up, asking me to follow him. We walked past the bustling lobby and descended a sweeping staircase into the subterranean levels of the bank. The temperature dropped noticeably with every step. The warm, inviting atmosphere of the upper floors vanished, replaced by stark fluorescent lighting and thick concrete walls. We reached a massive circular steel vault door. The manager swiped his security badge, entered a code, and the heavy gears engaged with a loud mechanical thud. The thick steel door slowly swung open, revealing rows upon rows of polished metal deposit boxes. He led me down a narrow, cold aisle to section 042. He inserted his master key into the left side of the lock. "Now I need your biometric verification," he stated smoothly, gesturing to a small digital scanner mounted flush against the steel wall. I placed my right index finger on the glowing green glass. A red laser swept over my fingerprint. For a tense moment, nothing happened. Then a sharp mechanical click echoed through the silent vault. The system had accepted me. Grandpa Jeremiah had registered my biometric data years ago, likely when I was a teenager, opening my first checking account under his supervision. He had been planning this exact moment for decades. The manager pulled the long, heavy metal box from the wall, placed it on a rolling cart, and escorted me to a private, soundproof viewing room. He closed the solid door behind him, leaving me completely alone in the silent, windowless space. I sat down at the small metal table and took a deep breath. The air in the room felt incredibly thin. I reached out and lifted the hinged lid of the deposit box. I half expected to find stacks of hidden cash-bearer bonds or perhaps a collection of rare diamonds. Instead, the box was almost entirely empty. Resting at the very bottom of the cold steel container was a single yellowed manila folder and a modern encrypted flash drive. There was no wealth here. There was only information. I pulled my laptop from my briefcase, booted it up, and inserted the flash drive. A password prompt immediately appeared on the screen. Without hesitation, I typed in the serial number from the $20 bill. The encryption software accepted the code, and a massive directory of files flooded my screen. I opened the yellowed manila folder first. It contained fragile, fading bank statements, original property deeds, and internal corporate memos dating back 25 years. The letterhead belonged to Sterling Builders, my grandfather's original construction firm. I began cross-referencing the physical documents with the digital files on the flash drive. As a forensic accountant, I read spreadsheets the way other people read novels. Numbers tell a story, and the story unfolding before my eyes was one of absolute horrifying betrayal. For my entire life, my father, Marcus Sterling, had aggressively marketed himself as the ultimate self-made man. He graced the covers of business magazines, gave arrogant speeches about black excellence, and boasted about building his $500 million real estate empire entirely from scratch. He always claimed that my grandfather Jeremiah was a weak, incompetent businessman who drove Sterling Builders into bankruptcy through poor management, forcing Marcus to step in and save the family name. The files on the screen proved that narrative was a complete and utter lie. 25 years ago, Sterling Builders was highly profitable. Grandpa Jeremiah had secured massive contracts to develop residential neighborhoods across Atlanta. But Marcus, who was acting as the chief financial officer at the time, had systematically drained the company dry. I clicked through pages of shadow ledgers and hidden wire transfers. Marcus had forged my grandfather's signature on dozens of high-interest corporate loans. He then funneled that borrowed capital into a complex web of offshore shell companies that he secretly controlled. When the loans inevitably defaulted, Sterling Builders collapsed under the crushing weight of the artificial debt. The bank seized everything my grandfather had spent his entire life building. But the bank did not hold the properties for long. The documents revealed that Marcus used the very money he had embezzled to buy back his father's seized assets at rock-bottom foreclosure prices. He legally washed the stolen capital, rebranded the stolen properties under his newly formed holding company, and officially launched his own real estate empire. My father did not build his wealth from the ground up. He cannibalized his own flesh and blood. He destroyed his father's reputation, pushed him into forced bankruptcy, and left him to die in disgrace, all while using the stolen funds to buy luxury cars, designer clothes for my mother, and fund the lavish lifestyles of his favorite children. A cold, hard fury settled deep into my bones. The sheer scale of the sociopathic greed was staggering. Marcus had built his pristine, untouchable reputation on the shattered remains of a good man. He had paraded his stolen wealth around Atlanta, demanding respect and obedience from everyone, while secretly knowing he was nothing more than a common thief in a tailored suit. I stared at the glowing screen, the damning financial records reflecting in my eyes. My grandfather had gathered every single piece of evidence needed to send his own son to federal prison. But Jeremiah had loved Marcus too much to destroy him. He had chosen to suffer in silence rather than tear his family apart. But I was not Jeremiah. I did not possess his boundless forgiveness, and I certainly did not care about protecting the Sterling family image. Marcus had called me a disgrace. He had tried to demolish my property and threatened to starve me out of my own profession. He thought he was an untouchable titan of industry. He was wrong. He was just a fraud standing on a house of cards, and I was holding the match that would burn it all to the absolute ground. I did not stop at the historical ledgers. I needed to see exactly how my grandfather's stolen assets were currently funding my father's empire today. I opened a heavily encrypted subfolder labeled Sterling Plaza. This was Marcus's absolute crown jewel. It was a highly publicized $500 million commercial mega project slated to break ground in the West End tomorrow morning. It was the exact development he used to secure massive international investments, elevate his public profile, and cement his status among the Atlanta elite. The blue light of the monitor reflected sharply in my eyes as my gaze darted across the screen. I scrolled rapidly through hundreds of pages of complex property deeds, city zoning permits, and convoluted holding company structures. I tracked the corporate capital flowing directly from Marcus's primary accounts into a secondary land acquisition firm called Oak Street Development. He had used this specific shell company to aggressively buy up all the surrounding real estate in the West End, effectively suffocating my grandfather's rotting Victorian house. He genuinely believed that bullying me into signing away my single pathetic inheritance would hand him the very last piece of the puzzle. He assumed the rest of the land was already safely in his pocket. But Grandpa Jeremiah was a master builder who knew exactly how to lay an unbreakable foundation. He knew his relentlessly greedy son would eventually try to seize the entire neighborhood. Decades ago, long before the forced bankruptcy that ruined his reputation, Jeremiah had quietly transferred the primary deeds of the Central West End properties into an impenetrable legal fortress. He created an ironclad blind trust. I pulled up the most recent acquisition records. Marcus had recently authorized a massive wire transfer of $50 million to Oak Street Development to finalize the commercial land acquisition for Sterling Plaza. He thought he had successfully purchased every single square inch of the construction site from independent local sellers. He was spectacularly wrong. Oak Street Development was not an independent vendor at all. It was a dummy corporation set up by my grandfather specifically to trap my father in his own blind ambition. Marcus had carelessly paid $50 million of investor capital into a trust that he had absolutely zero legal control over. My fingers flew across the keyboard as I cracked the final layer of security on the trust documents. I opened the primary beneficiary designation file. My heart hammered against my ribs as I read the notarized legal deed. There was only one single name listed as the sole proprietor of the trust: Maya Sterling. The sheer magnitude of the revelation hit me with the force of a freight train. My father did not own the land beneath his $500 million vanity project. I did. I owned the dirt. I owned the air rights. I owned the very foundation upon which Sterling Plaza was supposed to be built. Marcus had already secured hundreds of millions in overseas investments based on the entirely fraudulent claim that he held a clear, undisputed title to the construction site. If he swung a sledgehammer or moved a single piece of earth tomorrow morning without my explicit legal consent, he would instantly be committing massive commercial wire fraud against every single one of his international financial backers. My father looked at me in that conference room and saw a pathetic failure holding a torn $20 bill. In reality, I held the absolute lifeblood of the Sterling real estate empire in the palm of my hand. I could completely crush his carefully constructed legacy and trigger a catastrophic federal investigation with a single phone call to the city zoning board. The power dynamic had not just shifted, it had entirely reversed. I owned Marcus Sterling. A sharp, jarring ringtone suddenly shattered the dead silence of the subterranean bank vault. I jumped slightly in my metal chair, the sudden noise cutting sharply through my intense focus. I glanced down at my cell phone resting on the cold steel table. It was not Marcus or Preston calling to deliver another arrogant threat. The caller ID flashed a high-priority emergency alert from the senior partner at my own independent forensic accounting firm. I answered the call immediately, keeping my eyes locked on the undeniable proof of my ultimate leverage displayed brightly across the laptop screen. I expected a routine client update. Instead, the voice on the other end of the line was frantic, breathless, and deeply apologetic. My business partner delivered a piece of news that threatened to tear my entire counterattack apart before I could even make my first move. My father had already anticipated a brutal fight, and he had just struck a devastating preemptive blow to ensure I could not fight back. "Maya, we have a catastrophic problem," my senior partner David stammered through the speaker. His voice was trembling, entirely devoid of the sharp confidence he usually carried into the courtroom. The sterile steel walls of the vault seemed to tilt sharply as his words hit me, throwing my entire sense of balance completely off axis. I gripped the edge of the metal table to steady myself, feeling the sudden dizzying drop of the room. "I am listening, David. Tell me exactly what happened," I demanded, keeping my voice perfectly flat. "Your parents just dropped a nuclear bomb on this agency," he said, his breathing erratic. "Your mother used her charity board connections to leak a massive scandal to the local press, and your father called in favors with 3 different superior court judges. They filed an emergency ex parte injunction against you at 8 o'clock this morning. They are suing you for severe elder financial abuse, Maya. They submitted a fabricated psychological evaluation claiming Jeremiah suffered from advanced dementia, and they are accusing you of manipulating him in his final years to steal his assets." My blood ran absolute ice. Elder abuse. It was the most despicable reputation-destroying charge a forensic accountant could possibly face. Marcus and Vivian were not just trying to take my property, they were trying to annihilate my entire professional existence. David swallowed hard, the panic radiating through the phone line. Because of the severity of the allegations and your father's political leverage, the judge signed the order immediately. They froze everything, Maya. Not just the Sterling Trust accounts. They froze your personal checking, your independent savings, and our firm's primary operating accounts. The state licensing board just contacted me. They are threatening to suspend your CPA license pending a full criminal investigation. We have major corporate clients pulling their contracts as we speak. I am so sorry, Maya, but I cannot fight Marcus Sterling. Nobody can. The line went dead. David had hung up, terrified of being caught in the blast radius of my father's wrath. I lowered the phone from my ear. The silence in the underground vault was suffocating. Marcus and Vivian had executed a flawless, coordinated character assassination. They knew I had built a shadow network of independent wealth, and they used their corrupt legal connections to sever my access to every single dime I had earned. They painted me as a manipulative monster who preyed on a dying old man, effectively weaponizing the very care I had provided to my grandfather against me. By cutting off my firm, they ensured I had no allies left to help me fight back. My phone vibrated violently in my hand, shattering the quiet. The caller ID flashed my father's private number. He was watching the board, monitoring the exact moment his attack landed. I swiped the screen and lifted the phone to my ear. I did not say a word. "I told you what happens when you bite the hand that feeds you," Marcus said. His voice was smooth, resonant, and dripping with absolute victory. He sounded like a king admiring a freshly conquered battlefield. "You thought you were so clever, Maya. You thought running a little boutique accounting firm made you a player in this city. You are nothing. You are a discarded pawn." I stared at the glowing screen of my laptop, where the blind trust documents proving my absolute ownership of his $500 million development site remained brightly illuminated. "You are currently radioactive waste in the Atlanta financial sector." My father continued, thoroughly enjoying the sound of his own voice. "Your mother made sure your name is mud at every country club and corporate board in the state. No bank will ever touch you. No client will ever hire you again. You cannot even afford a decent public defender to protect yourself against the elder fraud charges. I will make sure you face federal prison for exploiting my father." He paused, letting the heavy threat sink in. "But I am a merciful man," Marcus said, his tone shifting into mock sympathy. "I do not want to see my own flesh and blood locked in a penitentiary. I will offer you one final deal. You will sign the West End property deed over to Sterling Real Estate by 5 o'clock this afternoon. You will hand over that piece of junk house to my demolition crew. If you do exactly as you are told, the lawsuit will quietly disappear. The injunction will be lifted, and your accounts will unfreeze. You can go back to your pathetic little life. But if you refuse me again, I will personally make sure you are disbarred, completely bankrupted, and locked in a jail cell before the weekend." He waited for me to beg. He expected me to cry, to apologize, to surrender completely to his overwhelming power. He thought he had successfully backed me into a corner with absolutely no way out. He thought I was just a terrified girl desperately clutching a worthless $20 bill. A slow, cold laugh rumbled in my chest. It bubbled up my throat and echoed sharply against the thick steel walls of the bank vault. The sound was not hysterical or defeated. It was dark, amused, and utterly lethal. "What is so funny?" Marcus demanded, his confident tone faltering for a fraction of a second. I looked at the digital deed on my screen. I looked at the $50 million trap my grandfather had set, the trap my father had blindly walked right into. Marcus had just handed me the perfect justification to destroy him without a single ounce of mercy. "You woke up the wrong person," I said. I ended the call. The heavy double doors of the Piedmont Country Club ballroom swung open, yielding to the polished brass handles pushed by 2 uniformed staff members. I did not hesitate for a single second. I stepped over the threshold, letting the heavy, suffocating atmosphere of Atlanta high society wash over me. The Sterling annual charity gala was in full swing. It was my parents' ultimate vanity project, a glittering masterclass in performative philanthropy designed to convince the world that the Sterling family was the absolute pinnacle of generosity and success. The room was a sprawling sea of conservative black tuxedos, charcoal suits, and muted champagne evening gowns. It was a carefully curated aesthetic of old money discretion. I tore straight through that aesthetic. I wore a floor-length crimson silk gown with a daring asymmetrical neckline and a high slit. The fabric moved like liquid fire around my legs with every step I took. I did not walk like a woman who had her bank accounts frozen that morning. I walked like a woman who owned the entire building. Marcus had specifically instructed the front gate security to permanently revoke my access to the country club. He thought his little court order had effectively exiled me from elite society. But my father consistently underestimated the power of my professional network. I did not use a family pass to get through the heavily guarded entrance. I walked in on the arm of my top forensic audit client, Jonathan Pierce. Jonathan was a reclusive tech billionaire who rarely attended these ostentatious events, making his presence a massive coup for any gala host. When the security detail saw his platinum VIP credential, they practically bowed. Jonathan offered me a knowing, razor-sharp smile, patted my hand, and smoothly detoured toward the private bar, leaving me a wide-open path to execute my completely uninvited arrival. A live string quartet played a sophisticated classical arrangement in the corner, providing a wealthy soundtrack to the clinking of crystal champagne flutes. I glided past the towering ice sculptures and the lavish floral arrangements, my eyes scanning the room for my targets. It did not take long to find them. They were holding court exactly where I expected them to be, right in the dead center of the ballroom, surrounded by the most influential politicians and socialites in the city. My mother, Vivian, stood beneath a massive crystal chandelier. She wore a heavy diamond necklace that sparkled aggressively under the lights, her posture rigid with practiced elegance. She was currently entertaining a circle of wealthy doctors, wives, and local judges, her voice projecting just loudly enough to ensure everyone nearby could hear her boasting. "We are just overwhelmingly blessed," Vivian announced to the captive audience, her tone dripping with artificial humility. Preston just closed another record-breaking quarter on Wall Street, bringing so much incredible capital into the city. And my sweet Nia is balancing her luxury lifestyle with such effortless grace. They recently closed on the most spectacular $3 million property in Buckhead. Marcus and I are deeply proud of how they uphold the Sterling standard. Tomorrow morning is the groundbreaking for Sterling Plaza, and it is going to be the crowning achievement of our family legacy. I kept walking, closing the distance between the grand entrance and her little circle of sycophants. The crimson silk of my dress caught the light, demanding immediate attention. In a room strictly dedicated to blending in, I was a blaring siren. Heads began to turn. The polite, low hum of sophisticated conversation started to fracture. It began as a ripple at the back of the room and quickly swelled into a wave of sharp, distinct whispers. Eyes darted toward me, widening in shock. The elite guests of Atlanta knew the rumors my parents had been spreading all day. They had heard the vicious lies about my supposed mental breakdown, the whispers about elder abuse, and the sudden dramatic legal injunction against me. They expected me to be hiding in shame. They certainly did not expect me to crash their sacred sanctuary looking like absolute royalty. The physical reaction from my family was immediate and spectacular. Vivian caught a flash of red in her peripheral vision. She turned her head, and her camera-ready smile shattered into a million jagged pieces. The color drained so rapidly from her face that she looked physically ill. Her perfectly manicured hand gripped her champagne flute with such intense force, I thought the delicate crystal would shatter in her palm. The sophisticated matriarch of the Sterling family was suddenly rendered completely speechless, her jaw hanging slightly open in pure, unadulterated panic. Across the room, standing near the oyster bar with a group of city council members, Marcus stopped mid-sentence. His confident, booming laugh died instantly in his throat. His eyes locked onto me, bulging with absolute fury and utter disbelief. He had spent the entire morning executing a ruthless legal strategy to destroy my life, strip my professional credentials, and freeze every single dollar I possessed. To him, my presence here was a mathematical impossibility. I was supposed to be completely crushed. I was supposed to be begging for his mercy in the dark. Seeing me standing here dripping in crimson silk and unapologetic confidence was a direct, fatal glitch in his perfect matrix of control. The string quartet kept playing, but the silence in the immediate vicinity of the Sterling family was deafening. The crowd instinctively parted, creating a wide, clear path between me and my mother. I offered her a bright, lethal smile, raising my chin slightly. I could practically see the gears grinding in her head as she desperately tried to figure out how to maintain her pristine public image while forcefully ejecting her own daughter from the room. Before Vivian could formulate a single word, another figure violently broke through the crowd. It was my sister Nia. She had been standing near the dessert pavilion, flaunting her designer gown to a group of minor celebrities. The moment she realized I was the cause of the sudden shift in the room's energy, she abandoned her audience completely. Nia marched straight toward me, her designer heels striking the polished marble floor like aggressive gunshots. Her face was twisted into an ugly, furious scowl, stripping away every ounce of the refined elegance she had just been projecting. The golden child of the Sterling family was entirely unhinged by my sheer audacity to exist in her space. She moved with frantic, chaotic energy, closing the distance between us in seconds. Her eyes were blazing with the desperate, violent intent to publicly humiliate me and forcefully reestablish her dominance. She stopped just inches from my face, her chest heaving, completely ready to spark a massive, destructive confrontation right in front of the most powerful people in Atlanta. Nia stopped so close to me that I could smell the sharp, expensive scent of her designer perfume, mixed with the sour tang of her panic. She held a full crystal glass of dark red wine in her perfectly manicured hand. Her chest heaved with rapid, angry breaths. She looked me up and down, her eyes filled with absolute venom. Then, with a deliberate and calculated flick of her wrist, Nia tipped her glass forward. The dark red wine splashed violently across the bodice of my custom silk gown. Several women in the immediate vicinity gasped loudly, stepping back to avoid the collateral damage. Nia smirked, her confidence momentarily restored by her own petty cruelty. "What exactly are you doing here, Maya?" Nia demanded, her voice loud enough to carry across the silent ballroom. "Did you come here to beg for scraps? Preston told me your accounts were seized this morning. He told me you are completely broke and facing massive legal charges. You have absolutely no right to be in this room. You are just a pathetic failure crashing a party you could never afford. Stop embarrassing this family and get out before I have you thrown into the street." I did not flinch. I did not step back. I looked down at the dark wine staining my crimson dress, and then looked back up into my sister's eyes. "You threw red wine on a dark crimson dress, Nia," I said, keeping my voice perfectly calm and steady. "You always were completely terrible at basic strategic planning." Before Nia could respond to the insult, my mother lunged forward. Vivian grabbed my arm, her manicured fingernails digging painfully into my skin. She tried to aggressively pull me into a shadowed alcove away from the staring eyes of the city's elite, but I planted my heels into the marble floor and refused to move a single inch. If she wanted to have this conversation, we were going to have it right here under the crystal chandeliers. "You are a disgusting stain on this family," Vivian hissed through her teeth, her voice vibrating with pure rage. Her elegant facade had completely dissolved, revealing the vicious, desperate woman hiding underneath. "You think you can waltz in here and ruin my charity gala? You think you can extort money from your father's $500 million project with that rotting piece of garbage property? I will not let you destroy our reputation." Vivian turned frantically toward the nearest country club staff member. "Security!" she yelled, her voice echoing sharply. "Get this woman out of my sight immediately! She is trespassing!" I smoothly pulled my arm out of my mother's harsh grip. The surrounding crowd of politicians, judges, and high society wives watched in absolute silence, completely captivated by the dramatic implosion of the flawless Sterling family. I looked directly at the wealthy women Vivian had been desperately trying to impress just moments before. Then I turned my gaze back to my mother. You are standing here wearing a $100,000 diamond necklace. Mother, I said, raising my voice so every single person in the room could hear me with crystal clarity. Yet you are completely blind to the absolute financial ruin happening under your own roof. You love to brag to your country club friends about your perfect daughter and her flawless husband. You love to boast about your pristine family legacy. This entire family is completely hollow. Vivian opened her mouth to argue, but I did not give her the chance. I turned my absolute focus onto my sister. You tell everyone you are a prestigious, successful cosmetic surgeon. Nia, I stated, stepping closer to her until she was forced to take a step back. But you conveniently leave out the part where your luxury clinic is currently facing 3 massive medical malpractice lawsuits. You leave out the part where your operating licenses are under review by the state medical board. Your business is not successful. Your business is weeks away from absolute catastrophic bankruptcy. Nia's face drained of all color. The smug, arrogant smirk was instantly wiped away, replaced by raw, naked terror. She looked around at the crowd, realizing that her darkest secrets were being broadcast to the most powerful gossips in Atlanta. That is a complete lie. Nia stammered, her voice shaking violently. You are making things up because you are jealous. I do not make things up, I countered swiftly. Where do you think you got the $500,000 emergency bailout loan last month, Nia? Did you really think Preston secured that funding for you? Preston is completely broke. He secretly mortgaged your brand new $3 million Buckhead mansion to dump cash into high-risk offshore crypto accounts, and he lost every single penny of it. A loud collective gasp rippled through the crowd of elite guests. Whispers erupted immediately. Vivian staggered backward as if I had physically struck her, one hand flying up to clutch her diamond necklace. The flawless illusion of the Sterling family was disintegrating right in front of her eyes, and there was absolutely nothing she could do to stop the bleeding. That emergency loan you took to keep your clinic doors open did not come from a traditional bank. I continued, my voice ringing with total authority. It was disbursed by an anonymous private equity firm based out of Delaware. My private equity firm. I originated that loan, Nia. And effective as of 5 minutes ago, I officially recalled the entire balance due to a critical breach of your financial covenants. You do not have the cash to pay me back. Your clinic is done. Your mansion is heavily mortgaged to our father, and your husband is facing federal prison time for wire fraud. You have absolutely nothing left. Nia let out a choked, desperate sob. Her knees buckled slightly, and she had to grab the edge of a nearby cocktail table to keep from collapsing onto the marble floor. Vivian stared at me with wide, horrified eyes, completely paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of the destruction I had just unleashed. The society wives who had been fawning over my mother just minutes ago were now actively stepping away from her, physically distancing themselves from the toxic fallout of our family scandal. The air in the ballroom shifted dramatically. The crowd parted like the Red Sea as a towering, furious figure stormed through the center of the room. It was my father. Marcus Sterling marched toward us with a look of absolute murder etched across his features. His fists were clenched so tightly his knuckles were completely white. He was flanked by 4 massive private security guards, their expressions grim and ready for violence. Marcus stopped right in front of me, his chest heaving with explosive rage. The veins in his neck were pulsing visibly. He had just watched his carefully crafted empire of lies get publicly slaughtered by the daughter he had thrown away like trash. I told you I would destroy you, Marcus growled, his voice a low, terrifying rumble that carried over the silent crowd. I gave you a chance to walk away quietly, and instead, you come into my house and disrespect me in front of my peers. You are dead to me, Maya. You are dead to this city. He turned to the security guards and pointed a trembling finger directly at my face. Drag her out of here, Marcus ordered, his voice echoing with absolute authority. Throw her into the street where she belongs. The guards stepped forward, but I did not even flinch. I held my ground, staring directly into my father's furious eyes. You hold on to that $20 bill? Marcus sneered, his face twisted into an ugly, hateful mask. You hold on to that pathetic little souvenir from your useless grandfather, and you go live the rest of your miserable, failed life in the dirt. because after tonight you will never step foot in this society again. I looked at my father, taking in his blind arrogance and his desperate need to maintain control. He thought he was throwing me out in disgrace. He had absolutely no idea what was waiting for him at sunrise. Two heavily muscled security guards lunged forward, reaching out with thick hands to grab my arms. I did not flinch. I did not step back. I simply turned my head and shot them a look so incredibly sharp and commanding that they actually froze in their tracks. "Do not touch me," I stated. My voice was quiet, yet it carried the absolute authority of a woman who held the fate of every single person in this room. "I will walk out of here on my own. But first, I have a message for my father." The ballroom was entirely paralyzed. A slow, sweeping glance across the room revealed the horrified faces of Atlanta's elite. City council members, real estate moguls, and high society matriarchs stood perfectly still, their mouths slightly parted in shock. The illusion of the untouchable Sterling family was completely shattered, pieces of their fake perfection scattered across the polished marble floor. I turned back to Marcus, letting a slow, calculated half-smile form on my lips. I stepped directly into his personal space, forcing him to look down at me. The veins in his neck were still pulsing with explosive rage, but I could see a tiny flicker of confusion deep in his eyes. He expected me to scream. He expected me to cry, to beg for my reputation, or to publicly plead for my frozen bank accounts. Instead, I was completely at peace. I was standing in the very center of his destruction, and I had never felt more powerful. "You are absolutely right, Father," I said, keeping my tone light and conversational. "I am going to hold on to that $20 bill. I am going to hold on to it very tightly. You have worked so incredibly hard to build your legacy. You spent decades of ruthless ambition crushing anyone who stood in your way. You stepped on the back of your own father to build your fortune, all leading up to tomorrow morning." I reached up and smoothly brushed a non-existent piece of lint from his expensive tuxedo lapel. He stiffened, thoroughly repulsed by my touch, but too stunned by my calm demeanor to push me away. "Tomorrow is the grand groundbreaking ceremony for Sterling Plaza." I continued, my voice echoing clearly in the dead silence of the country club. $500 million of international investment capital. The mayor will be there. The national press will be there. It is the absolute pinnacle of your entire life. I just wanted to take this public opportunity to personally congratulate you on such a monumental achievement. Marcus narrowed his eyes, his heavy brow furrowing in deep suspicion. He was actively trying to find the hidden trap in my words. He searched my face for any sign of sarcasm or defeat, but I kept my expression flawlessly pleasant. He thought my frozen assets had completely neutralized me. His supreme arrogance blinded him to the reality of the situation. "In fact, I am so incredibly proud of your massive commercial development that I have arranged a very special gift for the ceremony tomorrow," I said, taking a deliberate step back to admire his stance. "I am going to have this gift delivered right to the main podium just as you cut the ribbon. I promise you, Marcus, it is a gift that will guarantee your name is remembered in this city for the rest of history. Make sure you smile for the cameras." Marcus sneered, letting out a harsh, dismissive scoff. He truly believed these were just the empty, petty threats of a defeated woman. But while Marcus puffed his chest out with blind confidence, Preston reacted entirely differently. I shifted my gaze past my father and locked eyes with my brother-in-law. Preston was a Wall Street vulture. He understood the lethal precision of a forensic auditor. He watched my face, and the horrific realization suddenly hit his body like a physical blow. He knew I had already cracked his offshore shell companies. He knew I had decimated his hedge fund and exposed his fraudulent margin calls. And looking at my absolute terrifying confidence now, Preston suddenly connected the dots. If I was this utterly fearless after having my accounts frozen, and if I was bringing up the Sterling Plaza land development, it meant I knew something catastrophic. All the color completely drained from Preston's face. A thick layer of cold sweat broke out across his forehead, gleaming under the bright crystal chandeliers. He took a stumbling step backward, his breath hitching audibly in his throat. He looked at Marcus, who was still glaring at me with foolish pride, and then he looked back at me. Preston's eyes were wide with pure, unfiltered panic. His hands began to shake at his sides. He finally understood the gravity of my words. He realized that tomorrow was not going to be a celebration. Tomorrow was going to be an absolute, unmitigated massacre. I gave Preston one final knowing nod. I let him choke on his own impending doom. Then I turned my back on my father, my mother, and my sister. I walked straight down the center of the grand ballroom, the crimson silk of my dress flowing elegantly behind me. The crowd parted silently, giving me a wide, respectful berth. The high society wives who had shunned me moments ago now averted their eyes, terrified of catching my attention. I heard the sharp, frantic whispers erupting the moment I passed them, the sound of my family's reputation burning to ash in real time. I walked out of the heavy double doors and stepped into the cool, humid Atlanta night air. I did not look back. I got into the waiting car with my client, Jonathan Pierce, leaving the Sterling family inside to enjoy the very last night of their fake hollow empire. The trap was fully set, and at sunrise the jaws were going to snap shut. The morning sun beat down relentlessly on the West End, baking the red Georgia clay. The site of the future Sterling Plaza had been transformed overnight from a neglected neighborhood block into a spectacular staging ground for corporate theater. A massive white event tent was erected directly over the very spot where my grandfather's rotting Victorian house still stood, strategically hidden behind towering glossy barricades, displaying digital renderings of the proposed $500 million megastructure. A pristine red carpet was rolled out over the dirt, leading up to a raised wooden podium flanked by gigantic floral arrangements. Hundreds of folding chairs were filled with the most powerful people in the state. International investors who had flown in from Dubai and London sat in the front rows wearing tailored suits and expectant smiles. The mayor of Atlanta was seated right next to the podium, chatting amiably with the city zoning commissioners. Dozens of local and national news reporters lined the perimeter, their heavy broadcast cameras positioned to capture every single second of the historic, groundbreaking ceremony. My mother Vivian sat in the VIP section wearing a pristine white designer suit and oversized sunglasses, waving flawlessly to the press. Nia sat beside her, though her smile looked incredibly strained in the harsh daylight. Preston sat on the other side of Nia, looking absolutely catastrophic. He was sweating profusely despite the cooling fans blowing across the tent. His eyes darted nervously toward the street every few seconds, his knee bouncing uncontrollably. He was the only one in the Sterling family who truly understood that a bomb was ticking under their chairs. But my father Marcus noticed absolutely none of this. He stood behind the thick acrylic podium, looking like an absolute conqueror. He puffed his chest out, gripping the edges of the podium with heavy, victorious hands. He had dismissed my warnings from the country club as the desperate, empty threats of a defeated woman. He truly believed he had won. He believed his legal injunction had permanently paralyzed me, and that his legacy was completely bulletproof. Marcus leaned into the microphone, and his booming voice echoed across the massive construction site through the state-of-the-art sound system. "Thank you all for being here on this monumental morning," Marcus began, flashing his signature charismatic smile at the flashing cameras. "Today we are not just breaking ground on a $500 million commercial plaza. We are breaking ground on the future of Atlanta. We are bringing unprecedented generational wealth back into a historic community. We stand today on the shoulders of giants. I built this empire with the values taught to me by my late father, Jeremiah Sterling. He taught me that true vision requires bold, unapologetic action. He taught me to build from the ground up." The absolute hypocrisy of his words was staggering. He was invoking the name of the very man he had bankrupted and destroyed, using his father's memory as a cheap marketing tool to impress foreign investors. The crowd, entirely ignorant of the dark truth, erupted into loud, enthusiastic applause. "This plaza will stand as a towering monument to Black excellence," Marcus continued, raising his hands to silence the clapping. It will be a testament to what we can achieve when we refuse to take no for an answer. We have secured the land, we have secured the capital, and today we officially secure our permanent place in the history of this great city. The mayor stood up from his seat, beaming brightly. He walked over to the podium carrying a velvet cushion. Resting on top of the dark blue velvet was a massive pair of ceremonial golden scissors. Marcus grasped the golden handles, lifting the scissors high into the air so every single photographer could get the perfect shot. A thick, wide ribbon of bright red silk was stretched across the center of the stage, symbolizing the official start of the demolition and construction phase. Marcus stepped forward, positioning the open blades of the golden scissors around the tight red silk. The crowd quieted down, a collective hush falling over the plaza as everyone waited for the ceremonial cut. Vivian stood up in the front row, clapping her hands together with artificial joy. Nia forced a weak smile for the cameras. Preston looked like he was about to vomit directly onto his expensive Italian shoes. Marcus took a deep breath, his eyes gleaming with unmatched arrogance. He prepared to squeeze the golden handles together. Before the metal blades could even touch the silk ribbon, a piercing, high-pitched wail shattered the quiet morning air. It was not the distant sound of a passing police cruiser. The deafening siren was right on top of them. The heavy, blaring noise completely drowned out the classical background music playing through the event speakers. Marcus froze, the golden scissors suspended mid-air. The reporters lowered their cameras, turning their heads in mass confusion. A convoy of 4 massive, unmarked black SUVs turned violently off the main street. They did not stop at the valet station. They did not pause at the VIP security checkpoint. The heavy vehicles smashed right through the temporary traffic barricades, tearing down the glossy promotional banners of Sterling Plaza. They drove aggressively onto the construction site, their thick tires kicking up massive clouds of dry red dirt directly onto the pristine red carpet. The SUV screeched to a sudden synchronized halt right in front of the main stage, completely blocking the view of the international investors. The dust settled over the horrified crowd. The blaring sirens were abruptly cut off, plunging the construction site back into a tense, suffocating silence. Marcus lowered the golden scissors, his face twisting into an ugly mask of outrage. He glared at the vehicles, completely furious that his perfect photo opportunity had been ruined. He opened his mouth to shout at his private security detail to remove the intruders. The heavy doors of the lead SUV swung open simultaneously. I stepped out of the back seat first. I was not wearing crimson silk anymore. I wore a razor-sharp, tailored charcoal business suit. My hair was pulled back into a severe, uncompromising style. I carried a thick, heavy leather briefcase in my right hand. I moved with slow, absolute precision, my heels crunching audibly against the dirt and gravel. I did not come alone. As I stepped forward, the men in the vehicles behind me filed out in perfect unison. They were not private security guards. They wore dark tactical windbreakers with 3 bold, bright yellow letters printed clearly across their backs. FBI. I walked directly toward the stage, my eyes locked dead onto my father's face. Following closely over my right shoulder was the lead federal agent of the Financial Crimes Division. Walking purposefully over my left shoulder was a man whose face was instantly recognizable to every single politician and investor sitting in the VIP section. It was the State Attorney General. The massacre I had promised at the country club had officially arrived. I walked straight up the center of the red carpet, my eyes locked relentlessly on my father. The heavy silence of the crowd amplified the sound of my heels striking the wooden steps of the stage. As I ascended the platform, the entire background seemed to shift and warp around me, the towering promotional banners and the breathless faces of the city elite blurring into a singular, hyper-focused moment of absolute reckoning. Marcus took a stumbling step backward, the heavy golden scissors slipping from his grasp and clattering loudly against the wooden floorboards. "What is the meaning of this?" Marcus bellowed, his voice cracking with a mixture of rage and sudden blinding panic. He turned wildly toward the private security guards lining the perimeter of the tent. "Get her off this stage right now. Remove these people from my property." Nobody moved. The private security guards took one look at the federal agents flanking me and immediately stepped back, lowering their hands and completely abandoning their billionaire boss. The state attorney general stepped up onto the platform right behind me, his expression grave and uncompromising. "Nobody is removing anyone, Marcus." The attorney general stated, his voice projecting clearly, without the need for a microphone. "We are here to execute a federal warrant, and you are going to listen to exactly what this young woman has to say." Marcus turned pale, his jaw going entirely slack. He looked at the federal agents, then at the attorney general, and finally at me. He looked like a man who had just realized the bridge he was standing on had already collapsed beneath his feet. I did not wait for him to process his destruction. I stepped directly into his personal space, reaching out with swift, calculated precision, and ripped the microphone straight out of his trembling hand. A sharp screech of audio feedback pierced the air, causing several people in the front rows to cover their ears. The noise commanded the absolute attention of every single person on the construction site. I turned my back on my father and faced the sea of flashing cameras, wealthy politicians, and international financiers. "My name is Maya Sterling," I announced, my voice echoing like thunder across the West End. "I am a licensed forensic accountant, and I am the granddaughter of Jeremiah Sterling, the man whose legacy is being used to sell you this massive development. I am standing here today to inform every single investor, city official, and media outlet in this tent that the $500 million Sterling Plaza megaproject is a complete, unmitigated fraud." A collective horrified gasp rippled through the VIP section. The mayor of Atlanta gripped the arms of his folding chair, his face draining of all color. The foreign investors in the front row stopped smiling instantly, their posture turning rigid as my words translated through their earpieces. Marcus lunged forward, desperately trying to snatch the microphone back. "Turn that off!" he screamed, spit flying from his lips. "She is insane. She is a bitter, disowned child making up lies to extort me. Arrest her!" Two FBI agents immediately stepped between us, placing their hands firmly on my father's chest and shoving him forcefully back against the decorative floral arrangements. He stumbled, his expensive suit wrinkling as he gasped for air, completely powerless to stop the broadcast of his own ruin. I placed my heavy leather briefcase on the acrylic podium, popping the brass latches open. I pulled out a thick stack of certified legal documents bearing the official seal of the state Supreme Court. I held them up high so the morning sun caught the glossy texture of the paper. "Marcus Sterling does not own the ground you are currently sitting on," I declared, driving the final nail into the coffin of his empire. "He does not hold the deed. He does not own the air rights. He does not possess a single legal permit to move a single grain of dirt on this city block. For the past 6 months, he has been courting hundreds of millions of dollars in international investment capital based on forged preliminary land surveys and outright lies." I turned slightly, ensuring the news cameras had a clear view of the documents in my hand. 4 days ago, Marcus Sterling authorized a wire transfer of $50 million of your investment capital. I continued, pointing directly at the front row of financiers. He transferred that money to a land acquisition firm called Oak Street Development, believing he was purchasing the final crucial parcels of real estate required to build Sterling Plaza. He told his board of directors that the acquisition was complete. He told the city zoning commission that the title was clear. He was entirely wrong. I paused, letting the heavy, suffocating reality settle over the crowd. Vivian had stood up from her seat, her hands covering her mouth in pure terror. Nia was shaking violently next to her. "Oak Street Development is not an independent real estate vendor." I revealed, my voice cold and surgical. "It is a dummy corporation. It is a shell company that funnels directly into a secure generation, skipping blind trust established 25 years ago by my grandfather, Jeremiah Sterling. My father blindly wired $50 million of your money into a bank account that he has absolutely zero legal control over. He bought nothing. He just handed away your money. And the sole legal beneficiary of that blind trust, the only person on earth who holds the absolute undisputed deed to this entire commercial block, is me." The silence that followed was so profound, I could hear the wind rustling the canvas of the event tent. I turned and handed the stack of certified documents directly to the state attorney general. He held them up, nodding gravely to the press, to visually confirm that every single word I had just spoken was the absolute, undeniable truth. By attempting to break ground today on land he does not own using investor funds he falsely secured through misrepresented assets, Marcus Sterling has committed massive systemic wire fraud. I concluded, my eyes sweeping over the paralyzed crowd. Sterling Plaza is a ghost. It does not exist, and it never will. For a fraction of a second, the world stood perfectly still. Then the entire construction site exploded into absolute unprecedented chaos. The illusion shattered violently. The international investors in the front row erupted from their seats, their faces twisted in furious panic. They threw their glossy promotional brochures onto the red dirt, shouting aggressively in multiple languages. They pulled out their cell phones, frantically screaming at their portfolio managers to freeze their asset transfers and pull their funding immediately. The mayor of Atlanta turned to his aides, his face purple with political terror, frantically ordering them to distance his administration from the Sterling family as fast as humanly possible. The reporters broke past the velvet ropes, rushing the stage like a pack of starving wolves. Camera flashes went off in a blinding, chaotic strobe light effect, capturing the exact moment the most powerful real estate dynasty in the state crumbled to dust. The crowd surged forward, a tidal wave of angry, desperate investors demanding their millions back from a man who no longer had a single penny to his name. The screaming investors were drowning out the sound of the sirens outside. I stood completely still at the acrylic podium, letting the tidal wave of absolute panic wash over the stage. I watched Marcus shrink under the furious assault of his former financial backers. He raised his hands, desperately trying to placate men who had just realized their millions were gone, but his voice was entirely lost in the roar of the mob. I was not finished. The destruction of Sterling Plaza was merely the appetizer. I reached into the breast pocket of my tailored charcoal business suit and withdrew the protective plastic sleeve. I slid the worn, faded paper out into the harsh morning sunlight. I leaned back into the microphone. The sheer cutting volume of the feedback loop I triggered sliced through the chaos, forcing the angry crowd into a stunned, ringing silence. I held my arm high above my head, pinching the top corners of the $20 bill so every single camera could focus directly on the green ink. The heavy broadcast lenses of the National Press Corps mechanically zoomed in, capturing an extreme close-up of the faded texture, the creased edges, and the highly specific serial number printed in the corner. "Take a very close look at this!" I commanded, my voice slicing through the humid Georgia air with absolute authority. 4 days ago, my father handed me this exact $20 bill at my grandfather's will reading. He laughed in my face. He called it a piece of trash. He told me it was the pathetic, worthless inheritance of a broken, useless old man. I lowered the bill just enough to lock eyes with Marcus. He was sweating heavily, his breathing ragged as he stared at the money in my hand. "But my grandfather Jeremiah was not a broken man, Marcus," I said, projecting my words, so they echoed off the canvas walls of the event tent. "He was a master architect who knew exactly how to dismantle the thief who destroyed his life." The crowd held its collective breath. The reporters were typing frantically on their tablets, broadcasting the scandal live to the entire country. "The serial number printed on this bill is not standard currency," I announced to the captivated audience. "It is a highly classified routing matrix. It is the biometric access code to a maximum security vault at First Federal Bank. And inside that underground vault, my grandfather left me the absolute, undeniable proof of the greatest financial crime in the history of this city." Marcus swayed on his feet. He took a heavy, desperate step toward me, but the federal agent standing at the edge of the stage immediately stepped forward, forcing him back with a stern warning. "For 25 years, Marcus Sterling has stood on stages, exactly like this one, claiming to be the ultimate self-made man," I said, turning my gaze back to the investors and politicians. "He has sold you all the myth of black excellence built from the ground up. It is a complete and total fabrication. 25 years ago, Marcus acted as the chief financial officer for his own father's construction firm, and he systematically bled that company dry. The absolute horror on the faces of the investors was now mixing with pure, unadulterated disgust. The mayor of Atlanta was practically sprinting toward his waiting vehicle, desperate to escape the blast radius of the scandal. Vivian was sobbing uncontrollably in the front row, her perfectly styled hair falling in messy strands across her tear-stained face. I have provided the FBI and the state attorney general with hundreds of pages of original physical banking ledgers. I continued, pointing directly at the federal agents who were now securing the perimeter of the stage. Marcus forged my grandfather's signature on dozens of high-interest corporate loans. He embezzled that massive capital into offshore shell companies, intentionally forcing his own father into catastrophic bankruptcy. Then he used that exact stolen money to buy back the foreclosed assets for pennies on the dollar. He did not build the sterling real estate empire, he cannibalized his own blood to steal it. Because the initial seed capital for sterling real estate was obtained through federal wire fraud and forgery, I declared, my voice ringing with total finality. Every single asset acquired subsequently is legally classified as the proceeds of a crime. Every skyscraper, every luxury condominium, every country club membership, and every dollar in the Sterling family bank accounts is entirely tainted. It is all dirty money. I looked directly at my father. He was no longer the imposing, arrogant titan of industry. He looked small, fragile, and utterly terrified. The federal government is not just halting this construction project, Marcus, I said, delivering the final fatal blow. They are initiating a total asset forfeiture. The mansion in Buckhead, the luxury cars, the corporate accounts. Everything is being seized by the Department of Justice today. You have absolutely nothing left. Marcus let out a choked, guttural gasp. His hands flew up to his chest, clutching tightly at the fabric of his expensive suit. His face turned a dangerous, mottled shade of gray. The sheer, overwhelming reality of losing absolutely everything he had spent his entire life stealing hit his heart like a physical hammer. He staggered backward, his knees buckling beneath him. He hit the wooden floorboards of the stage hard, gasping for air, looking up at me with wide, panicked eyes. He was finally experiencing the exact same helplessness and humiliation he had inflicted on my grandfather decades ago. While Marcus collapsed, the rest of the family was thrown into a state of absolute survival panic. Nia was screaming, dropping to her knees next to her mother. But my eyes darted to the right, catching a sudden frantic movement near the edge of the VIP section. It was Preston. The arrogant hedge fund manager had just realized that a total federal asset forfeiture meant his own deeply compromised financial records were about to be ripped wide open by the FBI. His illegal margin calls, his offshore crypto accounts, and his insider trading were permanently tied to the Sterling family's dirty money. If Marcus went down, Preston was going to be dragged right down into the abyss with him. Preston did not try to help his wife. He did not check on his father-in-law. He turned his back on the Sterling family entirely and bolted. He shoved a high society wife out of his way, sprinting desperately toward the rear exit of the white event tent, hoping to slip away in the chaos and make it to his luxury SUV. He burst through the canvas flaps, sprinting into the bright sunlight of the construction site, his designer shoes kicking up clouds of red dust. But he did not make it more than 10 feet. Before Preston could even reach the gravel parking lot, 3 towering men wearing dark tactical gear stepped directly out from behind a row of portable construction barricades. They moved with lethal, synchronized precision, completely cutting off his only escape route. Preston slammed on the brakes, his suede boots skidding uselessly in the red Georgia clay. He spun around frantically, looking for another exit, but 2 more federal agents flanked him from the side, their hands resting firmly on their duty belts. Preston was completely surrounded, his pristine white shirt soaked in cold sweat, his breath coming in short, terrified gasps. The net had completely closed and there was absolutely nowhere left to run. The lead federal agent stepped out from the shadow of the barricades, pulling a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his tactical belt. Preston Davis, you are under arrest for severe federal wire fraud, insider trading, and international money laundering, the agent stated. His voice rang out over the chaotic noise of the fleeing investors and the blaring sirens. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Preston did not fight back. He did not demand to call his expensive corporate lawyers. The arrogant, untouchable Wall Street manager completely and utterly collapsed. His knees hit the red dirt, ruining his custom-tailored Italian suit. He openly sobbed, his chest heaving with violent, pathetic gasps as the cold steel clamped tightly around his wrists. He looked back at me, tears streaming down his face, silently begging for a mercy he never once showed to anyone else. I simply stared back with a perfectly blank expression. The agents dragged him away, his expensive suede boots dragging uselessly through the thick mud. From the main stage behind me, a blood-curdling scream tore through the humid morning air. Nia had just watched her entire fake, luxurious reality get thrown forcefully into the back of a federal transport vehicle. She scrambled down the wooden steps of the platform, her designer heels snapping off under her weight, causing her to stumble face first into the dirt. She crawled toward the barricades, screaming her husband's name. Her heavy makeup smeared across her face in thick, dark streaks, completely ruining her flawless cosmetic enhancements. The golden child of the Sterling family was absolutely hysterical. She turned her furious, tear-stained face toward our parents, screaming that they had ruined her life. She realized in that exact moment that her $3 million Buckhead mansion was gone. Her cosmetic surgery clinic was bankrupt. Her husband was going to federal prison, and she was left with absolutely nothing but the designer dress on her back. She thrashed in the dust, completely stripped of her superiority, while the national news cameras captured every single second of her spectacular downfall. I turned my attention back to the stage. The VIP section was completely empty now. It had been rapidly abandoned by every single politician, judge, and foreign investor who wanted to avoid being photographed near the epicenter of the scandal. The only people left on the platform were the federal agents, my fallen father, and my mother. Vivian was trembling violently. The heavy $100,000 diamond necklace around her throat suddenly looked like a literal noose. As I took a slow, deliberate step toward her, the vicious, controlling matriarch completely broke. The woman who had proudly called me a disgusting stain on the family just last night dropped heavily to her knees, right there on the hard wooden floorboards. Vivian reached out with shaking hands, her manicured fingers desperately grasping at the hem of my charcoal suit trousers. "Maya, please," she sobbed, her voice cracking with sheer, unadulterated terror. "You are my daughter. You are my sweet, beautiful girl. We are family. Please do not do this to us. Tell them to stop. Tell the agents it is a massive misunderstanding. We can fix this together. We can share the trust fund. I will give you anything you want. Just please have mercy on your mother." I looked down at the woman who had spent 34 years treating me like a disease. I looked at the woman who had actively tried to freeze my bank accounts, destroy my professional license, and throw me into a federal prison just 24 hours ago. There was absolutely zero warmth in my chest. I did not feel a single ounce of pity or hesitation. "Yesterday morning I was radioactive waste," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level and icy cold. "Yesterday, I was a bitter, jealous failure who deserved to starve in the street. You tried to destroy my entire professional existence because I refused to sign away my grandfather's legacy. You do not get to call me your sweet daughter now just because my boot is resting firmly on your throat." I smoothly pulled my leg back, forcing her hands to drop empty to the wooden floor. I reached into the breast pocket of my suit jacket and pulled out the faded, creased $20 bill, the very same bill they had used to humiliate me at the will reading. The exact physical key that had unlocked their total and complete destruction. I held the bill out over her trembling form and let it slip from my fingers. The paper fluttered gently through the humid air and landed squarely on the floorboards, coming to rest right in front of my mother's knees. "Take it," I commanded, my voice carrying the uncompromising weight of absolute finality. "This is all this family has left." Vivian stared down at the $20 bill, her sobs echoing loudly across the empty VIP tent. She knew I was right. The federal asset forfeiture would strip her of her mansion, her jewelry, her bank accounts, and her prestigious country club memberships. She was going to be left completely destitute, publicly shamed, and entirely alone. Behind Vivian, 2 federal agents hauled Marcus Sterling to his feet. His face was a ghastly shade of gray, His breathing was heavily labored, but he was completely conscious enough to witness the absolute end of his life. He had recovered from his initial shock, only to find himself stepping directly into a living nightmare. The lead agent forcefully pulled my father's arms behind his back. The sharp, unmistakable sound of the metal handcuffs ratcheting tight echoed loudly across the empty event space. The sound cut through the noise of the construction site like a sharp blade. Marcus did not look like a titan of industry anymore. He did not look like a billionaire real estate mogul. He looked like exactly what he was: a pathetic, broken thief who had finally been caught by his own boundless greed. The agents marched Marcus past me. He did not say a single word. He did not even lift his head. He stared blankly at the red dirt as he was escorted down the stairs and shoved roughly into the back of a black federal SUV. The heavy vehicle door slammed shut with a definitive ringing thud that signaled the absolute end of an era. The engine roared to life and the convoy sped away. The flashing red and blue lights cut through the thick clouds of dust, carrying the great Marcus Sterling away to a federal holding cell. I stood completely alone on the stage, the bright morning sun beating down on the ruins of Sterling Plaza. The long, terrifying nightmare of the Sterling Empire was officially over, and the air in Atlanta had never felt so incredibly clean. The dust from the construction site eventually settled, and when it did, it buried the Sterling family legacy permanently. I am sitting back in my own living room now, the warm amber lighting reflecting off the polished mahogany of my favorite leather armchair. I take a slow, quiet sip of my Earl Grey tea, enjoying the absolute undisturbed peace of my house. The frantic flashing of camera lenses and the chaotic sirens are a thing of the past. The storm has completely passed, and the aftermath is exactly what I promised it would be. Marcus Sterling's federal trial was the most highly publicized media circus in Atlanta's history. The United States Department of Justice did not show a single ounce of mercy. When the prosecution presented the physical banking ledgers recovered from my grandfather's blind trust vault, the entire courtroom sat in stunned silence. The $20 bill was logged into the official court record as Exhibit A, the undeniable key that unlocked a 25-year-old conspiracy of wire fraud, embezzlement, and money laundering. My father tried to use his signature charm on the jury. He wore his best custom-tailored suit and attempted to play the victim of a vindictive daughter. But numbers do not have emotions, and they certainly do not lie. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Marcus was found guilty on all 72 federal charges. The judge sentenced him to 25 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary without the possibility of early parole. The man who used to boast about his private jets and $500 million real estate projects is now spending his twilight years locked inside a concrete cell wearing a standard-issue orange jumpsuit. His empire was entirely seized by the government to pay restitution to the international investors he defrauded. Preston Davis, the arrogant hedge fund manager who loved to explain finance to me, broke faster than anyone else. The moment he was placed in an FBI interrogation room, his superior attitude evaporated. He openly wept and desperately tried to cut a plea deal by throwing my father entirely under the bus. He handed over all of his encrypted hard drives, hoping the Securities and Exchange Commission would go easy on him. His cowardice did not save him. The SEC permanently revoked all of his trading licenses and seized every single offshore account he had hidden in the Cayman Islands. Preston was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison for massive insider trading and securities fraud. For a man who used to throw a temper tantrum if his morning espresso was poured at the wrong temperature, federal prison is a daily, excruciating nightmare. His career is permanently dead, and his reputation on Wall Street is a complete laughingstock. The fallout for my sister Nia was a spectacular display of poetic justice. With her husband locked in a federal cell and the Sterling family bank accounts completely drained by government seizures, her fake luxury lifestyle imploded overnight. The bank formally foreclosed on her $3 million Buckhead mansion. I was told she screamed at the repo men when they arrived to tow away her customized Mercedes SUV. Her cosmetic surgery clinic, already drowning in malpractice lawsuits, was shuttered by state medical regulators. Left with absolutely zero income and mountains of aggressive debt, the golden child of the Sterling family was forced to file for Chapter 7 bankruptcy. All of her high society friends, the women she used to drink champagne with at exclusive charity galas, instantly blocked her phone number. They dropped her the second her credit cards started bouncing. Naya now lives in a tiny, noisy one-bedroom apartment outside the city perimeter. She takes the public bus to work as a receptionist at a discount dental clinic. The woman who once threw a glass of red wine on my custom silk dress now spends her days filing paperwork for minimum wage entirely forgotten by the elite circles she sacrificed her soul to impress. But my mother Vivian experienced the most brutal fall from grace. She had built her entire identity on being the untouchable matriarch of Atlanta high society. Without Marcus's stolen wealth to prop up her illusions, she was reduced to absolutely nothing. The Piedmont Country Club formally revoked her membership via a cold certified letter. The IRS seized her multi-million-dollar jewelry collection and her expansive designer wardrobe to pay off the massive tax penalties Marcus had accrued. Left completely destitute, Vivian was forced to move into a cramped, subsidized government housing unit. She now survives on a meager state pension and food stamps. The former sorority queen, who used to mock my perfectly honest career, now has to clip coupons to buy discount groceries. I heard through mutual acquaintances that she wears large sunglasses and a scarf when she goes to the local supermarket, desperately terrified that someone from her old life might recognize her standing in the clearance aisle. The society wives who used to hang on to her every word now cross the street to actively avoid making eye contact with her. She traded her soul for a $100,000 diamond necklace, and now she has absolutely zero dignity, zero wealth, and zero family left to manipulate. The absolute destruction of their fake reality brings me an incredible sense of closure. They spent 34 years trying to convince me that I was a failure because I refused to conform to their toxic, greedy standards. They thought they could strip me of my inheritance, freeze my bank accounts, and parade my destruction in front of the world. They failed spectacularly. Every single person who actively participated in tearing down my grandfather's legacy and trying to ruin my life received exactly what they deserved. The universe balanced the scales, and the karma was absolute. I take another slow sip of my tea, sinking deeper into the soft leather of my chair. The house is quiet, safe, and completely mine. The hypocrites have been eradicated from my life, and I am the only one left standing. I set my empty teacup down on the saucer. The quiet peace of my living room gently fades away, replaced by the vibrant, pulsing energy of the city. The view shifts to the heart of the West End district under a bright, cloudless sky. A slow, sweeping glance captures a massive, beautifully designed modern brick and glass building. It stands proudly on the exact footprint where my grandfather's rotting Victorian house once sat. Carved into the polished stone near the grand entrance are thick, bold silver letters. The Jeremiah Sterling Business Support Center. Marcus had planned to pave over this rich historic neighborhood to build a soulless concrete parking structure and a high-end retail plaza. He wanted to erase the local culture completely just to cater to international billionaires. When I officially took control of the blind trust, those very same foreign investors crawled back to me. They flooded my office with frantic phone calls and massive bouquets of apology flowers. They offered me hundreds of millions of dollars to simply authorize my father's original blueprints and walk away quietly. They thought everyone had a price. They thought I was just as greedy as the man who raised me. I turned down every single one of their offers and formally banned them from ever doing business on my property again. My grandfather Jeremiah was never just a construction worker. He was a visionary who cared deeply about his people. He originally bought this land decades ago because he wanted to create an incubator for young Black entrepreneurs. He knew how brutally hard it was for minorities to secure fair commercial loans from traditional banks. He wanted to build a sanctuary where raw, unpolished talent could meet actual tangible opportunity. Marcus destroyed that noble dream out of pure selfish greed 25 years ago. I finally brought it back to life. I walk through the heavy glass doors of the center today, and the atmosphere instantly buzzes with electric ambition. The sprawling facility is a state-of-the-art commercial hub designed specifically to uplift the community. The ground floor features heavily subsidized premium retail storefronts exclusively reserved for local startups. I pass by a bustling bakery owned by a young woman who was previously denied 3 different bank loans. Across the hall is an independent bookstore celebrating local authors and a vibrant community art gallery showcasing the brilliant work of neighborhood kids. The upper floors house collaborative tech workspaces, legal aid clinics, and financial advising offices. I moved the headquarters of my own forensic accounting firm directly into this building. My top analysts and I now provide completely free financial literacy workshops, tax preparation, and business auditing services for every single entrepreneur who operates under this roof. We make absolutely certain that these young business owners are legally protected so that no corporate predator like my father can ever swoop in and steal their hard-earned assets. This building is the true definition of Black excellence. It is not the fake, highly exclusionary country club elitism my parents worshipped. It is not about buying $3 million mansions or wearing heavy diamond necklaces to prove your worth to people who secretly despise you. Real excellence is about lifting as you climb. It is about taking your resources and pouring them directly back into the foundation of your community, so the next generation does not have to struggle exactly the way you did. I step out into the central open-air courtyard of the facility. The space is filled with lush greenery, trickling water features, and modern benches where young professionals sit with their laptops sharing ideas and building their futures. Right in the very center of the courtyard stands a solid bronze memorial plaque. I run my fingers over the raised metal lettering dedicated to Jeremiah Sterling, a man who built foundations that could never be broken. I feel a profound, overwhelming sense of pride swelling in my chest. I think back to that cold, hostile conference room at the law firm. I remember the deafening sound of Preston laughing at me. I remember the absolute disgust in my father's eyes and the cruel, dismissive sneer on my mother's face. They handed me what they genuinely believed was a worthless scrap of trash. They thought they were handing me my own humiliating defeat. They expected me to crumble under the crushing weight of their rejection, quietly fade into the background, and accept my assigned role as the pathetic family failure. But you cannot bury someone who knows how to thrive in the dirt. Seeds require darkness to germinate. From the absolute mud of their toxic, deeply calculated betrayal, I grew an entire forest of opportunity. I took the exact weapon they used to mock me and forged it into an unbreakable legacy of hope and empowerment. The faded $20 bill is no longer hidden in my handbag. It is professionally framed in thick protective glass, hanging proudly on the wall directly behind my office desk. It serves as my daily reminder of the fire I walked through and the incredible power of playing the long game. My family tried to teach me that my worth was defined entirely by their conditional approval. They wanted me to believe that without their money and their elite social status, I was absolutely nothing. But standing here in the bustling, sunlit courtyard of my grandfather's realized dream, watching dozens of people build their own successful lives because I refused to back down, I know the absolute truth. My worth was never up for negotiation. When you strip away the designer clothes, the luxury cars, and the fake smiles, you are left with character. My parents had zero character, which is why they ended up with absolutely nothing. I chose integrity over fast money. I chose the truth over a comfortable lie. And because I made those choices, I gained the whole world. The legacy of the Sterling name is no longer defined by the ruthless thieving greed of Marcus Sterling. It is defined by this building, by these people, and by the undeniable truth that true power comes from lifting others up, not tearing them down. The nightmare is over. The foundation is rock solid, and the future is brighter than my family could have ever possibly imagined. The vibrant noise of the city slowly fades into the background as I sit back in the deep leather armchair of my living room. The warm amber glow from the table lamp casts a calm, steady light across the room. I take a deep breath, inhaling the absolute tranquility of a space that is entirely my own. There is no shouting here. There are no frantic phone calls from a sister demanding a bailout, no arrogant lectures from a father trying to assert his dominance, and no bitter criticisms from a mother who only valued me as a prop for her social standing. There is only peace, the kind of profound, unshakable peace that you can only achieve after you have fought the hardest battle of your life and emerged completely victorious. I look across the room at the heavy oak desk resting near the window. Sitting perfectly centered on that desk is a thick block of custom polished acrylic. Encased inside that protective glass is the faded, worn $20 bill. I keep it right where I can see it every single day. When my father slid that piece of paper across the mahogany table at the law firm, he genuinely believed he was handing me my ultimate humiliation. He intended it to be a permanent physical reminder that I was completely worthless to the Sterling family. He wanted me to frame that insult and carry the shame of it for the rest of my miserable life. He had absolutely no idea that he was actually handing me the precise weapon I needed to tear his fake empire to the ground. When I look back on everything that happened, I realize that the most dangerous flaw of narcissistic, greedy people is their absolute certainty that everyone else is weaker than they are. My parents and my sister built their entire identities on the illusion of power. They draped themselves in designer clothes, parked luxury cars in their driveway, and threw lavish charity galas to convince the world that they were untouchable. They were so intoxicated by their own fabricated reality that they completely forgot how real power is actually generated. Real power does not come from a country club membership. Real power comes from knowing the truth, understanding the numbers, and having the sheer uncompromising discipline to strike only when the trap is perfectly set. For years, they called me the family disappointment because I refused to play their game. I refused to marry for status, and I refused to conform to a hollow definition of Black excellence that required stepping on the throats of your own community. They thought my empathy for my grandfather made me a weak target. They thought my quiet observation meant I was ignorant. But what they failed to understand is that when you isolate the scapegoat of the family, you do not break them. You teach them how to survive independently in the dark. You teach them how to see every single crack in your foundation. I did not just spend my life auditing corporate financial statements. I spent my entire life auditing their character, and they were completely bankrupt long before I ever froze their assets. There is a profound lesson in all of this one that extends far beyond real estate and trust funds. We are often conditioned to believe that family loyalty is an absolute, unbreakable obligation. We are told to forgive the unforgivable simply because we share the same blood. We are pressured to sit at toxic dinner tables, swallow vicious insults, and shrink ourselves down just to keep the peace. But peace that requires your own destruction is not peace at all. It is a hostage situation. If you are watching this right now and you resonate with my story, I want you to listen to me very carefully. If you are the black sheep of your family, if you are the one who is constantly belittled, underestimated, and cast aside, do not let their bitter narrative dictate your self-worth. Their cruelty is not a reflection of your failure. It is a loud, glaring projection of their own deep-seated insecurities. They mock you because your authenticity threatens the fake reality they have worked so desperately hard to maintain. You do not have to beg for a seat at a table where you are continuously disrespected. You have the power to walk away and build your own table. Educate yourself. Protect your assets. Build your financial independence with quiet, relentless determination. Financial literacy is not just about balancing a checkbook. It is the ultimate shield against manipulation and abuse. When you control your own resources, nobody can force you to compromise your dignity for survival. My journey from that cold law office to this moment of absolute freedom was the most terrifying and exhilarating experience of my life. I had to mourn the parents I never truly had and accept the harsh reality of who they actually were. But in shedding that heavy toxic weight, I gained the entire world. I gained the ability to honor my grandfather's true legacy. I gained a thriving community that I am proud to support. And most importantly, I gained an unshakable respect for the woman looking back at me in the mirror. My family thought they had broken me. They thought a single $20 bill and a rundown house in the West End was the ultimate insult. They did not know it was the exact key I needed to shatter their fake empire into a million irreversible pieces. Never apologize for knowing your worth, and never ever hesitate to collect the debts you are owed. I looked directly into the camera lens, letting a slow, fiercely confident smile spread across my face. The warm light of the living room begins to dim the shadows, gracefully closing in around the edges of the room until there is nothing left but the absolute certainty of my victory. The screen fades completely to black. The ultimate lesson from this story is that true power and self-worth can never be inherited, bought, or dictated by toxic family members. Society often conditions us to believe that blood ties demand endless loyalty, even at the cost of our own dignity. However, this journey proves that accepting a designated role as the family scapegoat is a choice, not a life sentence. When you are systematically undervalued and manipulated by the people who are supposed to protect you, walking away is not an act of betrayal. It is an act of profound self-preservation. Furthermore, the narrative highlights the absolute necessity of financial literacy and personal independence. The Sterling family built a fragile empire on fraudulent appearances and aggressive control, foolishly believing that cutting off access to their wealth would force total submission. Yet true leverage comes from quiet discipline, education, and building a solid foundation that nobody can ever freeze or take away from you. The very traits that toxic people mock, such as empathy, patience, and integrity, are the exact tools required to dismantle their fabricated reality. If you have ever had to walk away from a toxic environment to protect your peace, share your story in the comments below, and do not forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more empowering content.